Colleagues, Céad Míle Fáilte, 100,000 welcomes and good morning from here in Dublin, and welcome to this side event, which is hosted by Ireland's Department of Transport and our partners in Transport Infrastructure Ireland. Before we begin today, I'd like to start with a little bit of housekeeping, if I may. My name is Ken Spratt. I'm Secretary General here at the Department of Transport in Dublin, and I'm going to act as chair for this event and introduce each of the speakers. Once we've heard from all four presenters, there'll be a question and answer session where you'll be able to ask your questions to the speakers by writing your question in the chat. You can also add a question at any time during today's event. When doing so, can you please signal your country or your organisation and which of the speakers you would like to address your question to. I'd also like to draw your attention to the live poll feature, which is displayed in the panel. I invite you to read through the 5 poll questions now and provide a yes/no response for each of them. And I'll keep you updated on the poll results throughout today's event. So if we could start, colleagues, with the first question. And the first question is, do you think e-scooters and e-bikes will reduce car trips in urban areas? So do you think e-scooters and e-bikes will reduce car trips in urban areas? We'll move on to the second question, and I'm going to leave these open, but the second question, just so that you can see it, is, do you think the increasing use of electric cars will reduce mode shift to public transport by lessening driver guilt? So do you think the increasing use of electric cars will reduce mode shift to public transport by lessening driver guilt? Our third question is, will the increase, let me just move my screen down, will the increase in online retail and business activity reduce the total demand for mobility? So will the increase in online retail and business activity reduce the total demand for mobility? Our fourth question is, do you think that people are considering the environmental impacts of different modes when making their travel decisions? So are people considering the environmental impacts of different modes when making their travel decisions? Good question. And our fifth one is, will we return to our usual pre-pandemic travel patterns as we emerge from COVID? And I guess a lot of people are looking forward to seeing what the new normal is. And of course, travel will be a big question there as well. So will we return to our usual pre-pandemic travel patterns as we emerge from COVID? So those polls we'll leave open, and I'll come to the first results before we hand over to our first speaker. So the theme of today's event is The Greener Path, a people-centred approach to a sustainable island. The theme is very timely, considering both the wider theme of the summit, which is, as we all know, innovation for sustainable development, reshaping mobility in the wake of COVID-19, and in the context of the COP26 meeting later this year, where the focus will be on stepping up ambition to decarbonise the transport sector. Within Ireland, the need to increase the pace of decarbonisation has also come into sharp focus recently. As Minister Ryan noted in his opening address to the plenary, Ireland has adopted a target of achieving a zero carbon society by 2050. And as a stepping stone towards this goal, we're also committed to achieving a 51% reduction in Irish GHG emissions over the period to 2030. So over the next 10 years, we have to halve our emissions, quite a target for us, but we're all pretty sure we can do it. Meeting these targets will be extremely challenging and will require significant scale up in actions right across Irish society. We at the Department of Transport are currently contributing to the update of our climate action plan, which will set out a detailed set of actions required to meet our 2030 and our 2050 emissions reductions targets. For the transport sector, these actions will include the deployment of green technologies, such as electric vehicles, and investing in sustainable and active travel infrastructure. The department is also supporting the update to our National Development Plan, which sets out Ireland's spending priorities, including the delivery of major public transport projects and investments in walking and cycling infrastructure, which my colleagues from the National Transport Authority and Transport Infrastructure Ireland will tell you more about in just a moment. New innovative mobility solutions will also play a key role in helping us deliver a greener transport system, and Alan Murphy from Smart Dublin will address some of these innovations in his presentation this morning. However, it is important that as we work to decarbonise the transport sector, that we do so in a sustainable and equitable way that places people at the heart of transport design. Rachel Cahill will talk about the Travelling in Women's Shoes study in her presentation and the insights that this offers us for planning a safer, more reliable and more equitable transport system. Finally, decarbonising our transport system will require international cooperation and collaboration and the sharing of examples of best practice with each other. In this spirit of international cooperation, we're delighted to have Ewan Delaney, and we know his Irish surname, from the New Zealand Ministry of Transport, here to share his ministry's insights, planning and design of a safe, reliable and equitable transport system within another small island nation. So before I hand over to our first speaker, I'd like to have a quick look at our poll result for question 1. So let me just flick across onto my second screen here and get the results to that. So do you think that e-scooters and e-bikes will reduce car trips in urban areas? And we've got a pretty overwhelming majority. We've got 80% saying yes, 20% saying no. So what these results may suggest is that you think that micro-mobility solutions have an important role to play in decarbonising our transport system. And that's good to see. So thank you for that. So thanks very much to those of you who have engaged with the poll so far. And for any of you who haven't provided answers to that question, I invite you to do so throughout the session and we can see if there is any impact on that. If it hasn't been closed, it might have been closed, and if it is, sorry about that. So I'd now like to hand over to Rachel Cahill from Transport Ireland, who will present on TII's role in decarbonising and delivering a more sustainable transport sector. Rachel, over to you, please.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody, and thank you, Ken. I'm just going to share my screen, which hopefully will work. And just put it into presentation mode. Great. Oh, sorry. Hopefully I'm sharing. One of my colleagues might tell me if I'm not.
Nothing there yet, Rachel.
Oh, nothing there yet. Goodness. Okay. Sorry, apologies, folks. Best intentions and all that.
Take your time, it'll come.
Yeah, I'll just stop that. I don't know what I've done there. Apologies, folks. Let me try that again. Okay. Is that working?
Don't see anything there, Rachel.
Oh, goodness, folks.
Yeah, we have it now, Rachel.
Oh, super.
We have it now.
The joys of virtual world. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Ken, for that introduction. And good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to be here from Transport Infrastructure Ireland. As Ken said, my name is Rachel Cahill, and I am the head of TII's Chief Executive Office and work across the organisation to deliver our key strategic goals. We are a public sector transport agency and report directly to the Irish Government, the Irish Department of Transport. Transport Infrastructure Ireland, or TII for short, is responsible for the provision of a safe and efficient network of national roads, in addition to the provision and operation of light rail and metro systems. Our purpose is to provide sustainable transport infrastructure and services, delivering a better quality of life, supporting economic growth and respecting the environment. This map of Ireland shows our island nation and Ireland's national road network comprising motorways, dual carriageways and single carriageways. The map also shows our light rail public transport system that we designed, built and now operate in Dublin, our capital city. Our light rail system, known as Luas, carries approximately 48 million passengers per annum, has 81 trams, 69 stops and 7 park and ride facilities. Like all countries across the globe, COVID-19 has had a significant impact on the Irish transport sector. But as we begin to emerge from the pandemic and our society reopens, re-establishing capacity and services in our transport systems and encouraging sustainable mobility are key drivers for our economy. For us, collaboration is key, working together for better outcomes internally and externally, nationally and internationally, and across public and private sectors. A key starting point is for the public and private sectors to work together with a strong focus on delivering transport solutions integrated with land use planning. For Ireland, achieving compact growth and connecting urban centres is key, and this requires a wide range of perspectives to be considered, from dealing with increasing transport demand and resulting congestion, to creating new and safe public spaces for all to use, embracing new and innovative thinking, such as 15-minute towns and centres, greenways and national cycleways, micromobility and other innovations to address first and last mile solutions. These all have a significant role to play in delivering integrated transport solutions and reducing emissions. Balancing competing objectives and choosing the right options will be central to the decarbonisation agenda, safeguarding the future of our networks. Today, I would like to share with you some of the work and activity that TII is engaged in to enable Ireland's transition to a low and zero carbon economy. TII has a vision to lead in the delivery and operation of sustainable transport, enabling our networks to drive inclusive growth, create job opportunities, enhance the well-being of all persons, including vulnerable groups, strengthen our resilience to address climate change, maintain our commitment to the environment, and continue to prioritise safety. This is the context in which we have captured our sustainability agenda in the form of our new Sustainability Implementation Plan. As a major transport infrastructure provider, we can influence change and lead improvement towards a more sustainable sector through collaboration, engagement, and leadership in areas such as the provision of effective, efficient, and equitable mobility, safe and resilient networks and services, delivering end-to-end improvements through sustainable procurement, and reducing the carbon impact of our activities. These are 4 of TII's 6 sustainability principles, which we recently adopted as part of our new Sustainability Implementation Plan. A future-focused plan which looks at outcomes over a 5, 10, and 15-year time horizon, guiding and helping us to think and work through the lens of sustainability and carbon reduction. As part of our new Sustainability Implementation Plan, TII is engaged in supporting sustainable cities and regional communities. And here are some of our tangible contributions. Delivering sustainable public transport infrastructure. Designing and building transport corridors on our motorway network to facilitate public transport on our roads. Building national cycleways and greenways. Facilitating park and ride and park and share schemes. Introducing dynamic traffic management solutions on the M50 motorway around Dublin city centre. Updating our technical standards and project management guidelines to facilitate all road users, including active travel modes of transport. And lastly, understanding travel behaviour and patterns through research and also emissions modelling using TII's National Transport Model. In terms of public transport schemes, TII works in partnership with their sister agency, the National Transport Authority, to deliver and operate Dublin's light rail system in the city, with plans to expand to other areas in Dublin and also to other urban centres and cities, such as Cork, Lucan and Bray. And we are working together to deliver the proposed Metrolink system. TII is also designing new transportation corridors on some of our motorways for buses and coaches, as mentioned on the previous slide. I also mentioned our work in understanding travel behaviour and patterns through research and emissions modelling. In terms of understanding travel behaviour, for my last 2 slides, I would just like to speak briefly about TII's Travelling in a Woman's Shoes report that was published last July, and it is available on both our website and also on the Irish exhibition page here at the ITF, on the ITF platform. Social sustainability and inclusion, a key element of the UN Sustainable Development Goals, places people at the heart of design. Understanding the travel behaviours and needs of all cohorts in our society is the starting point to designing truly sustainable transport systems. It is internationally recognised that transport is not gender neutral, and that increased awareness and understanding of the distinct aspects of women's travel needs is required. Exploring the experiences of women travelling in Ireland is a critical part of our sustainability agenda, given our role in designing, building and operating transport systems. This study is the first of its kind in Ireland and provides rich insight into the lived experiences of women travelling in Ireland today. Before we conducted our own research, we looked at the data available to us from the Irish Central Statistics Office and other sources. And this provided the basic building blocks for our study. We then looked at the international research available, and it will come as no surprise to see that safety, or the perception of safety, is the biggest concern for women when choosing their primary mode of transport. Other themes coming from the international research include access, reliability, and convenience and comfort. We then started our own research and adopted a two-pronged approach to really get under the bonnet and find out what motivates women in Ireland when choosing their transport modes. We conducted ethnographic research with 21 women, spending 2 hours with each woman and joining them as they went about their daily travels. This really gave us rich and detailed insight into women's travel needs. We also conducted a quantitative survey with 1,000 people, 500 men and 500 women. The real-life stories of women allowed us to explore additional central themes which influence mobility, and that is how family, safety, and diversity shape transport choices. The main findings from the study, which are consistent with global research, are summarised as follows. In Ireland, women's mobility is hindered by existing household gender dynamics that largely place the burden on women. Women are also adversely impacted by being and feeling unsafe in public spaces, particularly when walking and using public transport. Designing sustainable transport infrastructure becomes synonymous with designing inclusive, safe, and high-quality experiences that consider women and the needs of their family. Involving women users in the co-creation of policy to reduce the chance of unintended consequences is key as we transition to a low-carbon society. For us in Transport Infrastructure Ireland, we are now applying many of the findings and recommendations outlined in the report to our own projects, programmes and operations. And we are also applying the learnings beyond TII, sharing our knowledge and findings with stakeholders both at home and abroad. For example, here at the International Transport Forum, and we were also recently engaging with the European Commission on this topic. So transport in Ireland is changing. The transition to low carbon and sustainable transport modes requires us all to face complex and interconnected challenges. Increased collaboration, communication and engagement is key, involving central government, transport agencies, academia and industry partners in pursuit of a shared strategy and a just transition to a low carbon society. That's everything from me. Thank you very much for listening, and I'll pass you back to Ken.
Rachel, thank you very much for that presentation. I have to say, great presentation. I really enjoyed it. But I also had the pleasure of engaging with you on the women traveling in her shoes and women's shoes. And I have to say, it's a fantastic piece of work, and it does emphasize the importance, and your presentation brings it out nicely. Sustainable public transport isn't just about sustainability, isn't just about clean air and decarbonisation. It's about pleasant journeys, and it's about safe journeys, and it's about equality of access. Yeah. So thank you to you for your presentation, and to TII for all of the work that they do in that space. Thank you for that. Our next presenter is Anne Graham from the National Transport Authority, and Anne is going to discuss our plans for significant investment in sustainable and active travel. So Anne, over to you, please.
Good morning, and good morning from Dublin. Just going to put on my presentation. So I'm going to speak to you today about the greener path, looking at both bus transport and active travel. You just might let me know when it's gone into presentation mode.
We have you now, Anne.
Yeah, okay. Okay, the National Transport Authority, what we do is we regulate and provide bus, rail and light rail services. And we also regulate the taxi and commercial bus industry. We invest in public transport projects, and we're also responsible for the integration and technology around real-time passenger information. We also put together transport planning documents and also have programs to encourage people to use public transport. In terms of the greener path for transport, what we're trying to do and everything that we do now as part of our work is addressing carbon emissions. And we're looking at the avoid, shift and improve principle. And today I'm just going to focus on the shift and improving. And if we look at the improving public transport services and trying to make them more attractive, one of the things that we have been doing over the last number of years is introducing additional services, improving the reliability and punctuality of those services, improving the information at stops, and also providing a brand for public transport in Ireland called Transport for Ireland as a unifying brand for all the public transport services that are provided. In terms of technology and integration, we have a national intermodal online journey planner. We provide passengers real-time passenger information, and we have an integrated smart ticketing, a national integrated ticketing through our Leap card. We provide a ticket on your phone, which we've been just launching very recently. And as a result of all those improvements, we have seen a significant increase in public transport use from 2012 up to 2019, 40% increase in public transport, with in between 2018 and 2019, almost a 10% increase in usage. But as you can imagine, COVID has had a very dramatic impact on that. But we had been on a trajectory of significant growth in public transport use. In terms of providing new public transport infrastructure, the National Development Plan, the government's Project Ireland 2040 plan, sets out the investment priorities for the country in terms of its investment, but also for the first time has put a significant investment forward for sustainable transport. And this is just giving you an indication of the level of funding that's now going into our sustainable transport, particularly in the bus programme and active travel, where you can see a step change in investment in the last 2 years. And we expect that to grow over the next 10 years. Bus Connects is one of the major projects that the authority is bringing forward. Because of our low density layout in the cities and towns, it means the bus system will always form the backbone of Ireland's public transport system. And tackling each city region's congestion issues means focusing on that bus system. And so Bus Connects has been brought forward as a plan to fundamentally transform our cities and towns bus system. And it's not just a Dublin programme, it's also a programme of our other cities and towns. So we need to provide and improve a bus system across all these major towns and cities. And what are we doing in terms of the programme? We're going to improve every aspect of the bus, from providing high quality priority and continuous bus priority and safe cycling facilities, redesigning the network of services, improving the ticketing system and the fare structure, looking at park and ride facilities, transitioning to low and no emission vehicles, and providing better information at stops and better shelter infrastructure. And if we just look at the vehicles as part of Bus Connects, we intend to transition to an urban fleet of low and zero emission at the tailpipe vehicles. The first 100 of an order of 280 diesel electric plug-in hybrid double-deck buses for urban services have been delivered, and they're now beginning to be rolled out in service in Dublin and Galway. The procurement of fully electric single-deck and double-deck fleet will be completed this year, with again deliveries commencing next year. We're also trialling 3 hydrogen-fueled double-deck buses later this year, and we have a plan in place to have zero-emission fleet on all our urban services by 2035. Part of Bus Connects Dublin is also to update our Leap integrated ticketing system to the next generation, which is an account-based system where you can use any means of ID as you access your public transport service and provide a different number of tickets and a much more flexible ticketing arrangement. It does mean that the future of total mobility across the country is that Next Generation could be the platform to support multiple modes, both public and private, for a single or multiple connected trips, and offer value and convenience to the traveller. So the procurement of that system by the NTA has commenced. But we're not just looking at urban services, we're also looking at how people travel in rural Ireland. And we've got a programme called Connecting Ireland, which is about rural mobility. And our objectives are to look at the quantity, quality and utility of our public transport outside of the major urban areas of Ireland. What would it take to be able to live in Ireland outside of our urban areas? So as you can see, in terms of the breakdown of where people live, 30% of people in Ireland live in very rural areas, and almost 50% between rural and is the urban and rural divide. So what we're trying to set out is that where people live in terms of their location, they could access their local centre within 30 minutes, their county town within 60 minutes, their regional centre within 90 minutes, and their major city within 120 minutes. And we're looking at building on the regional network of bus and rail, linking larger centres together, and then local services with a minimum level of 3 return trips a day, and integrating those together and complemented by demand responsive services. And by doing that, we can improve the position, because in terms of the connections that are currently in place, 26% of rural population have limited or no connections to public transport. 41% have access to at least 3 returns a day. And by implementing the new network of services, we can ensure that 50% have access to 3 services per day, and 17%, so we can reduce to 17% the areas which have no connections. And this is the network, the Connecting Ireland network. We're also, as an authority and as a country, gearing up for active travel. So cycling is now a key transport mode across Ireland, and in Dublin in particular, we've seen that cycling numbers have tripled in the period between 2005 and 2019, primarily due to public bike schemes, better infrastructure, and also tax incentives in terms of sales of bikes. And the government is very ambitious in terms of delivery of transport, or of walking and cycling infrastructure. It has set a target of 360 million euros per year for cycling and walking over the period of the government, which summates to 1.8 billion euros over 5 years. We have the plans already in place. It's now a question of delivery. And this is the indicative network for Dublin of primary, secondary cycle facilities, segregated cycle facilities across the city region. We have a network for Cork and Galway. And we took the opportunity during COVID to implement a number of the plans that were already in place by putting together an interim mobility in terms of segregated and safe cycling facilities. And these are just some examples of where we've taken road space in our cities and towns and provided it for walking and cycling movements. We've also carried out a study, particularly for the Dublin metropolitan area, about the propensity for cycling. And as we have seen from that study, 24% of adults cycle at least once a week. However, only 14% of women cycle at once a week. 11% cycle 5 days a week or more, but only 5% of women cycle that regularly. 21% of people don't cycle but would like to start, and 22% of women and 24% physically disabled. And the reasons for not cycling is 33% are concerned about safety, 24% about poor weather, and 18% are not confident cycling. And then what would help people cycle more? 69% of residents would find more cycle tracks on roads which are physically protected useful to help them to cycle more. And 65% of women would feel that that would help them cycle more. 84% of residents in the Dublin region supports building more protected on-road cycle tracks, even when this would mean less room for other traffic. So we feel this gives us the imprimatur now to provide this level of infrastructure. In terms of inclusivity, there is a gender and age imbalance in cycling participation in Dublin. In the Netherlands, 55% of all cycling trips are by women, and people over 65 make 24% of their trips by bike, which is higher than any other age group over the age of 26. And that's not what we've seen in Ireland. Another campaign that I just want to bring your attention to is the And She Cycles campaign, which is being run by Green Schools, funded by the authority, because 1 in 250 girls cycle to school each day. And the Green Schools Travel have been working with teenage girls to develop a campaign that shines a light on the barriers that are preventing them from cycling, and to start some necessary conversations and encourage their peers to cycle. Ireland is now on the greener path, helped by significant investment in public transport and active travel. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much for that, Anne. Great presentation as usual. I have to say, colleagues, I'm very lucky in that we in the Department of Transport have great collaboration with the National Transport Authority under Anne's leadership and with Transport Infrastructure Ireland. And it's fantastic that we do have such a good collaboration. We do have instructions to deliver. We have a big budget over the next 5 years. I think we're going to spend €1 million a day on active travel over the next 5 years. It's a huge amount of money, and hopefully, and I'm sure it will make a big difference. So Anne, thank you for your presentation. Before we move on to our next presenter, we might just have a quick look at the poll results for 2 and 3. And before I actually go to poll 2, just want to note Stephen's comment there where he mentions that e-bikes are a substitute for car journeys. And believes e-scooters are a substitute for active travel. So it's just an interesting distinction to be made there. Okay, so let me just flick across to question or poll 2 and take a quick look. So do you think the increasing use of electric cars will reduce mode shift to public transport by lessening driver guilt? And we have 77% saying no. So what's that telling us? So I suppose it's telling us that you suspect that guilt, which drivers of internal combustion engine cars feel, is not a significant factor in getting them to make the switch to public transport modes. So there's obviously other factors at play there, which we obviously need to figure out. So maybe it's to do with public transport frequency, maybe it's to do with service quality, and maybe it's to do with maybe the safety concerns that we heard from Rachel earlier on. Moving on to our third poll question, which was, will the increase in online retail and business activity reduce the total demand for mobility? And this one was a much tighter one, so it's 50-50. It's 50-50. So what can we say about that? Hard to know. So look, that one I think speaks for itself. Okay, so colleagues, we will move on. And we are now going to hear from Alan Murphy from Smart Dublin. So Alan is going to speak to us and give us his presentation. Alan, over to you.
Thanks, Ken. Just checking to see if the slides are coming through okay.
Yes, Alan, thank you.
Okay. Morning, everybody, and thanks, Ken, and your colleagues at the Department of Transport for giving me the opportunity to speak to you this morning. So my name is Alan Murphy. I'm the Regional Manager with Smart Dublin. I'm going to talk about one of our projects in the sustainable mobility space around mobility as a service, or MaaS, which for sure has got some airtime throughout the ITF Summit over the last recent days. So, well, first of all, who is Smart Dublin? So we are an initiative of the 4 Dublin local authorities, or the county councils. Our remit is to engage with technology providers, researchers, and citizens to address urban challenges and improve the quality of life. So the scope of our programme and the volume of projects that we do covers the breadth of the local authority services that get delivered. And sustainable mobility is a big part of that activity. So in terms of the agenda for the next few slides, I'll give you a bit of a background as to activities we've done leading to today. I'm going to talk about the key elements of our upcoming Mass for Ireland report, which we hope to share in June, which will touch on the case for change, a proposed Mass model for Ireland. So anybody who's familiar with the Mass space will be aware that there's different models and different approaches being adopted by different cities and even different countries globally. So what's the right Mass model for Ireland? And then some key takeaways at the end. So in terms of background and the summary of our activities to date, we started this journey back in 2019, trying to get our head around what is Mass, who's doing it, what information is out there in the public domain that we could research on. Just a nod to the Department of Expenditure and Public Reform, who awarded us an innovation, some funding to kick off this activity back in 2019. So they saw the value in exploring this topic. So a special thank you to the guys at DEEPR for enabling this activity. So we met with representatives from Helsinki and from Berlin in particular, who were to the fore in European circles on trying to progress the Mass agenda. So Q4 of 2019, you'll see there in blue was our first deliverables. We produced a point of view paper around what we were discovering around Mass. And like I said, it was taking many different forms. Every city to have a different flavor of it. For sure, there was a lot of conversation around apps and subscription models and revenue sharing, which all sounded quite complex and very tempting to just go down the app road. But also, once we dug a bit deeper and talking to some stakeholders in the cities that we met, that there was a real need to try and deliver Mass from a public authority or public body perspective to truly deliver the societal goals that Mass aspires to deliver. So fast forward then into Q2 of 2020, we held a workshop in Q1 of 2020. We delivered a report which touched on some key outcomes of that workshop. So in that workshop was mainly Dublin focused, but what came out of that really energetic day with something like 35 representatives, public and private transport operators, the Department of Transport were there, we had some academia representatives as well. If we're going to do Mass, let's do it based on a national scope. It's not just for Dublin. Another key outcome and fantastic to see in the room on the day was the real energy and desire from all the stakeholders to make this happen. I think both private and public transport operators in particular saw a win-win situation to try and deliver Mass for Ireland. And then also establish a transport technology forum. So that day was all about collaboration, brainstorming, some moonshot ideas. So to progress that through with some transport technology forum at some stage was also a key outcome. So then fast forward to where we are today, and we've done even more local and international stakeholder engagement, which I'll talk about in a second. And we hope to produce what we're now calling a Mass for Ireland report, which will include a case for change. So what are the expected benefits of Mass, the model that we think is right for Ireland, and again, some key takeaways. So then, as part of our recent work to feed into the Mass for Ireland report, these are the people we've met. So it ranges from, obviously, Anne's team at the National Transport Authority, some key public transport operators, the private mobility operators that are new to the market, and even some international players that are looking at Dublin and indeed Ireland as a new market. The councils play a role to enable Mass. Other interested parties, TII, Fáilte Ireland, other cities, what are they doing? And then some Mass service providers, so technology providers that are out there working with other cities internationally. We've been working with an organization called Urban Foresight, consultancy services that we engaged on this engagement. We've come up with our draft report, and we were lucky to get feedback from a selection of some of the above people. as well as from Polis, and also reps from the ITF. So many thanks to those representatives for feeding into a peer review process. So then to cut to the chase and to talk about the proposed model that we think is a good fit for Ireland and what we aspire to deliver under the sustainable mobility topic. What you're seeing here is one way to break down MaaS into different layers, and who are the actors and activities involved in delivering the MaaS ecosystem. Obviously, at the very top, the end user is key, and learning from end user activities and feedback into the MaaS ecosystem will help fine-tune the ecosystem. You've got MaaS providers which engage with users, typically using a front-end app. You've got a new integrator layer in the middle, the orange bit, which is this data layer, which we see as the first foundation to enable the MaaS model for Ireland. And then you've got services which we know and are familiar with, that are traditional as well as new services coming into the Irish market. And then, of course, infrastructure. Infrastructure has to be unlocked to enable those services to happen. We've come up with some design principles you see there on the bottom left. And by the way, this model aligns with the preferred model coming from the European Metropolitan Transport Authority, as per their paper they released in 2019. So to talk you through very briefly as to how this model would work, the starting point, like I said, is introducing this new platform data integration space, which would be like a neutral platform to gather the relevant information from the transport providers. So we're talking about initially a minimal viable product around data sharing to unlock their service, and a minimal viable product around data reporting to public authorities, for example, to the councils, as to the effectiveness of their operation, to the NTA, to the Department of Transport, etc. Once you create that foundation, you're in a position then to talk about true innovation and commercial conversations to perhaps combine those services, combine public and private services in a way that's attractive to the end user. You get into things like the pricing of those combination of services. Is it pay-as-you-go? Is it monthly subscriptions? Is it an annual subscription? And then you get into something to coin the term mini-MaaS. So this model is truly scalable at a national level, but also scalable downwards to something a bit more hyper-local or specific to an organization. So think a large employer, think a university, think a business district that may want to provide a bundle of services for a particular user cohort. And then, of course, policy plays a role, and policy and regulation can be applied at whatever layer of the MaaS ecosystem is the most appropriate layer to introduce that policy. So that's the crux of our report that we hope to produce in June, which will talk about the pros and cons of this model and how it's a good fit for Ireland. So then in terms of just key takeaways, one way to look at MaaS is from an IT analogy perspective, where the hardware integration of transport services is already happening. You see a little infographic there of a mobility hub, and many of these are happening around Western Europe in particular. If you then look at MaaS as introducing the software integration layer on top of that hardware, that's a nice analogy to describe MaaS. Point number two, MaaS is no longer about just an app, it's about making mobility a genuine service. So unlocking those services, as the model suggests, it could be accessed by a range of organizations within the mobility ecosystem as well as outside the mobility ecosystem. So think a sporting event, think an arts and cultural event that may want to consume or add on that mobility service to complement that activity, to make it more attractive for the user. Point number three, MaaS is a great opportunity for Ireland to radically improve transport using new mechanisms. And finally, number 4, we're talking about a people-centered approach here to sustainable mobility. It's all about providing a reliable alternative to the private car. So really, it's a digital opportunity here to provide the right information to the right person at the right time. Okay, that's all from me, Ken.
Alan, thanks a million. I love it. I saw this presentation already, and I have to say I'm very interested in understanding it more. I love that hyper-local term. You should probably copyright that. And what it brings out for me is, you know, necessity being the mother of invention, and us needing to, you know, to bear that in mind. But also, if you like, what you're doing is innovating around the customer, around the client, and I think that's, you know, that's the innovation that we need, and that's the innovation that stands the test of time. So look, well done to you and to Smart Dublin and all that you do, and look forward to collaborating with you continuously forevermore, because we'll never crack it completely, but it's great to see us heading in the right direction. So thank you for that, Alan. I'd now like to call on our final presenter, which is Ewan Delaney. He's from the New Zealand Ministry of Transport, and he's going to present to us on New Zealand's transport decarbonisation pathway. Ewan, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Ken, and thanks for the invite to participate. Unfortunately, only a quarter Irish, Ken, so just a smidgen. Good morning, good evening, everyone. So I'm from the New Zealand Ministry of Transport, and so we are essentially the government's advisor and the system steward for the New Zealand transport system, primarily a policy ministry, quite minister facing. And we work closely with our sisters of land, maritime and aviation transport agencies who do the operational investment side of things. My team specifically is charged with the broader environmental decarbonisation and climate adaptation challenges for the transport system. I thought it'd be worth sort of just sharing a couple of little facts about sort of New Zealand and sort of our context. So around the same population as Ireland, but about 3 times the land mass. So transport is around 47% of our total CO2 emissions. We have a highly renewable electricity system, which is obviously a great plus, but we have quite an unusual emissions profile for a developed country, and methane agricultural emissions are quite a significant issue for us. So the challenge in New Zealand, my slide's moving, there we go. So we have high per capita transport emissions. We have quite an old and inefficient vehicle fleets. We also have a problem with vehicle safety. Heavily reliant on road freight. You might be surprised to hear that we have a highly urbanised population in New Zealand, but it is characterised by sort of sprawling, low-density cities. One large city, a bit like Ireland, you know, we're a third of the population in Auckland. Quite large gaps between settlements, and so those are mostly serviced by sort of highway connections. We are, of course, geographically isolated, famously, and spread out domestically. So we rely heavily on those tricky to decarbonise areas, aviation quite notably. So yeah, transport is around half of our CO2 emissions. Unfortunately, those have increased dramatically since the 1990s. They're almost doubled. So that's kind of our starting point. High-level commitments of the New Zealand government is Paris Agreement, 30% reduction, 2005 levels by 2030. We also have a domestic legislation, quite a strong domestic overall framework. So we have a commitment to sort of net zero carbon position by 2050, and an independent climate change commission, which has provided draft advice to the government, and the government is soon to respond to that advice with emissions budgets, which will be binding. So that Climate Change Commission advice to the government for transport, which is what we're talking about, obviously, is to reduce transport emissions by half by 2035, in 14 years, and of course to around zero by 2050, allowing for some element of offsetting. They have recommended significant reductions in private vehicle travel and obviously increased PT and active modes for a rapid uptake of electric vehicles and ending the import of internal combustion engines. So obviously to meet those targets, we will need to look at the whole sector decarbonisation. We have primarily focused to date on the light vehicle fleet. We also have a political commitment to not purchase any more public transport buses that are internal combustion engine from 2025. And we are going to be needing to look beyond the light vehicle fleet, obviously, at the decarbonising the freight sector, which is around a quarter of our transport emissions. So recent moves to decarbonise the transport system. We have seen significant investment in public transport, around 2.4 billion euros in the last few years, new investment. In terms of the directions the government gives to the Transport Agency, which makes the individual investment decisions on projects, the emissions reductions have been made a priority in terms of those high-level directions from ministers. Significant expenditure planned on rail upgrades. Rail is primarily used for freight in New Zealand, and doubling funding for walking, cycling infrastructure. On the vehicle side, we've recently introduced a clean car import standard. So we don't manufacture vehicles, we import both a lot of new and a lot of used, unusually, a lot of used vehicles. And the new standard will require a 40% reduction in average vehicle emissions by 2025. So we're now targeting a really steep reduction in that. As I said, there's a commitment from the government that all public transport buses new ones will be zero emission by 2025, and that the whole fleet will need to be decarbonised by 2035. So that's quite a significant commitment, and recently announced intention to bring in a sustainable biofuel mandate across the transport sector. We're also about to launch some new incentives to increase EV uptake, which has not been particularly high to date, and also looking at options for phase out of internal combustion engine imports, and also floated the idea that we will need to take those off the road completely in the 2040s. So that's kind of the things that are going on at the moment. We have recently, in terms of the national conversation around how do we get to where we need to be, one of the things we've done recently is put out a green paper or discussion document, which sets out the various pathways we could take to a zero carbon transport system in New Zealand. This is known as Hikina Te Kohupara, which is a Māori name, roughly translates to sort of lifting the smog. This sets out the varying ways we could get to that zero emission system we want, and we've broken that down into different themes. So using the avoid, shift and improve framework, which you'll be familiar with, and focusing on how we travel our vehicles and the freight system we pulled out specifically as well. The idea is that we will have a bit of a conversation around this with stakeholders, and this will inform what goes into the emissions reduction plan that the government has to publish at the end of the year, containing binding emissions budgets. We know that the pathways we've identified here won't be the ones we actually end up following, because technology will move on and so on, but it's intended to kind of start to set the scene for the kinds of levers we will need to pull out and how quickly we will need to pull them. And in summary, we will need to pull quite a lot of levers quite quickly. Sorry. And so we're not currently on track, unfortunately. Transport emissions, the latest actual of 2019 was 16.2 megatons. The Climate Change Commission has recommended we get to 8.8 megatons by 2035, as I think you can see on that chart there. So the gap between that white circle and the top of the blue line or block is the gap between where we project we will be under a business as usual and where we need to be. Quite a significant gap. So to match those Climate Change Commission pathways, our modelling shows we'll need to reduce light vehicle travel by a third, nearly a third, have 20%, fifth of the fleet EVs, and make major mode shifts from roadway to rail and coastal shipping for freight. So really significant changes required. That's a really high-level summary of where we're going on emissions. I was also asked to talk briefly about COVID and our experience of that, which has been a little outside the international norm. As you may be aware, we have been successful in we did have COVID in the country. We've been successful in largely banishing it. So we've seen sort of essentially a bit of a post-COVID experience as well for the transport system. So we did go into a very strict lockdown in March 2020, and sort of largely came out of that in early June 2020, and for most intents and purposes, normal domestic life resumed with a few precautions of sort of scanning in and use of QR codes and a bit more hand sanitizer. What you can see in that chart there is that we did see obviously a dramatic drop off in bus patronage. That's the 3 major cities in that period. And then a rebound, but not a complete rebound. So there are a few things playing into that. We are seeing more working from home, slightly different patterns of travel. There's probably a bit of hesitancy around use of public transport. Auckland has seen a couple of short lockdowns since, so there's a bit more scarring happening there. Auckland is where our main international airport is, and that's where COVID has re-entered the country a couple of times. In terms of some of the changes we're seeing, people are working from home more, not travelling as much for meetings, even for those meetings that are a few hundred metres away across town. Folks are using Teams and Zoom much more. What else? So we have gradually reopened our public transport network. There's a few precautions. Face masks are mandatory in public transport planes. We have a set of processes to step back up if things change on the ground. We have found the aviation sector needs ongoing support. We have we're a very remote country, 4 hours flight to Australia, the nearest large country. So we need to maintain those people and freight connections, and we have provided support to the aviation sector to kind of keep those air freight moving, because we know we will need those connections in the future. Another thing, quite distinct thing, is where we're approaching the immunisation. The port and airport workers are the first priority, or have been the first priority for vaccination in New Zealand. COVID-19 is an external threat to us, so they are our first line of defence, and so there's been a huge focus on those workers, their welfare, and the need to keep them safe, keep them vaccinated through this. We're running a large mandatory isolation and quarantine operation at the border. Anyone who enters the country, and only citizens, residents, and a few other folks by exception are allowed in. That's all being managed around those ports and airports. Right, I think that's me. Thank you.
Ewan, thanks very much for your presentation. It's great for us as an island nation to hear from other island nations, and it's quite striking how similar we are in so many different respects. I have to say, reducing light vehicle travel by a third in a relatively short period of time is quite a challenge, and we have, or at least we will be having, a similar challenge ourselves once we finalise our own climate action plan, and we're just crossing the T's and dotting the I's and that at the moment. But there are very significant challenges ahead. But look, we embrace those challenges, and I think when we can collaborate like this and share expertise, just like you have shared with us, it will make it all the more likely that we'll achieve what we're trying to achieve. So Ewan, thank you very much for your presentation. Colleagues, we're a little bit tight on time, but I do want to get to one of the poll questions, and I do want to get to Q&A as well. We probably have time for just one question, and so I'm probably going to take the question with the most thumbs up. But before we do, we might just look at our poll results for question 4. So question 4, do you think that people are considering the environmental impacts of different modes when making their travel decisions? And we had a 71% saying no, which is interesting to see such a vote for no there. What's that telling us? It's probably telling us that people are considering factors like the cost of a journey, probably the convenience, probably the time it takes. They're probably more important factors as we decide how to travel at the moment, but that they are things that we're all going to have to work on together. Colleagues, we have time for one question, and I will go to the question which has, as I said, the most thumbs up. And Alan, this one is directed to you. The question is, the principle, don't limit consumer transport choices, would appear to not allow the discouragement of using autos for travel. And I guess that ties back in nicely with our own demand management ambitions, which we will be revealing in our climate action plan. And it comes back to the point I was making with Ewan just now, that it is important to try and reduce the demand for travel and reduce the use of light vehicles. So do you want to have a stab at that, Alan? So the principle, don't limit consumer transport choices, would appear to not allow the discouragement of using autos for travel.
Yeah, that was referencing to one of the 5 design principles that I think I had in the slide. The context behind particular one was actually more of an appeal to the mobility service providers to not get into walled garden commercial arrangements so that their services could be excluded to be consumed by other parties. That was the context of it, but I see where Ronald is coming from now. To the second element of his question, but there is a role for the car under mobility as a service. We can't go the whole hog and sort of outright ban on cars. It's too much of an extreme leap to prevent people using the cars. So there is a world where the car is maybe used for a particular leg of a journey, with the hope that mass transit or some shared mobility is then used for the longer element of their trip, if it is a multimodal trip. And also hopefully cars are used in a more sustainable way, be it car clubs or car pooling or car sharing. So the car has a role. I don't think we can discourage it 100% outright. Yeah.
Thanks very much for that, Alan. Great question, Ronald, and a great answer as well, Alan, I have to say. So thank you for that. Colleagues, we're at 11:02, so we've gone a couple of minutes over. But before we do conclude, I'd like to thank you all for your engagement today in what was a very interesting and informative session. I'd especially like to thank our 4 presenters who demonstrated how we can adopt a people-centred approach to creating a sustainable transport sector. While these presentations were specific to an Irish and New Zealand context, I'm confident that these insights on how we can create a more sustainable transport sector will be of interest to all countries and organisations, as we all struggle with the challenges of how to build back better, to use that great phrase, and ensure sustainable recovery from COVID-19, while also putting us on a path to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement. And finally, can I just say, colleagues, as the leader of the Department of Transport here in Ireland, working with our collaborative organisations who have presented here today, we have managed, I think, to do a pretty good job on the ITF this year. I'd like to especially thank the people here who have really put their hearts and souls into organising the ITF during Ireland's presidency under Deirdre O'Keefe's leadership. Could I just thank Claire and Aideen and Kyle and Alison. Well done, guys, great job, and hopefully we will see out the presidency as well as we have started it, and as we continue on our journey. Colleagues, thanks a million. Thanks to everybody who joined us this morning, but a particular thanks to our presenters. All the best. Berigi Bua, August Bannock. Slán live.